A very good day to everyone. We are from Group 1 entitled Machine Learning and its Application to Biology. As for introduction, machine learning is basically defined as a group of concepts that allows us to produce and assess algorithms to aid us in pattern recognition, to categorize, and to predict depending on the existing data. There are two main aspects of automation, which is our work in machine learning. First of all is with the aid of properly programmed computing machine, categorization and prediction is made easy in machine learning. And the second aspect is the production of classifiers in machine learning should be extremely automated to reduce human input. The main purpose of these aspects to ensure that human errors that influence the algorithm can be reduced through highly automated algorithm designing techniques. Perceptron is an early method that imitates real neuron behavior. This has enabled us to open a new branch of study on artificial neural networks designs in the early times. The elements of this article consist of main concepts and definitions, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and also techniques, examples, and language are. There are two main types of patterns of learning in machine learning, which is supervised and unsupervised learning. Supervised mathematical notation and concepts were adapted into machine learning to enhance both of these learnings. Supervised learning can be defined as a group of aspects that is used to categorize reservoirs of things. This learning will allow us to categorize things into classes based on the specific set of principles. The intention of supervised learning is to construct a system to predict the level of classification of new desired items precisely according to existing features and continuous traits of this desired item. While unsupervised learning does not have predetermined levels to categorize desired items. The aim of unsupervised learning is to define the similarities between items and set them into clusters or called as groups.
Then I will continue with supervised learning. For general concepts, supervised learning is an approach to the development of AI, artificial intelligence, in which input data and predicted output result are labeled for a program. Specifically, the AI system is told what to look for, and the model is trained so it can identify the underlying pattern and relationship that allow it to produce good results when faced with data that never been seen before. Supervised learning is basically good at classification and also regression problems. Next. So for the error estimation, usually to estimate the error in supervised learning, we usually use confusion matrix. So the error rate of the classifier usually defined as the average number of misclassified sample. So the tables here is an example of confusion matrix. So how to calculate the error? For example, here the sum of the diagonal element of the confusion matrix divided by the total number of the object. So error is equal to the misqualified sample, which is 20 and 10, divided by 100, we get 30%. So we also can calculate the accuracy, which is accuracy equal to 1 minus the error, and we get the 70%. So the best way actually to estimate error in supervised learning are LOO method, which are leave one out cross-validation method, and also n-fold cross-validation method. There are few types of classifier used in supervised learning. So in this video, we are going to highlight a few classifier, which are quadratic and linear discriminant analysis, k-nearest neighbor, decision tree, neural network, SVM, which is support vector machine. So for quadratic and linear discriminant, quadratic discriminant analysis is closely similar to linear discriminant analysis, where it is presumed that the measurements are normally distributed from each class. LDA is method that often used in supervised learning to reduce dimensionality. It is essentially a pre-processing stage for application in pattern classification and in machine learning. This is commonly used for a group modeling of variety. For example, distribution of variable into 2 or more classes, meaning we have 2 groups and we need to classify them efficiently. So from the picture here, we can see that they are blue triangle and also black circle, which means there are 2 different groups here. So we are going to use LDA, linear discriminant analysis, to separate the 2 classes. So I will proceed with k-nearest neighbor classifier. KNN is a supervised machine learning algorithm that is useful for problem classification. It measures the distance between the input and the test data and gives the prediction appropriately. The Euclidean distance formula used to measure the distance. This is the equation. So how does it work actually? So we need to see the picture here. So there are one red star, and also there are also yellow dot and also purple dot or blue dot. So the red star is our test data. Our checkpoint is encircled by yellow and blue dot, which represent 2 classes, class A and class B. Now we figure out the distance to each of the dot on the graph from our test point. And then since we have 10 dots, which means that we get 10 distance. Then we determine the lowest distance and predict that it belongs to its closest neighbor of the same class. When the nearest yellow dot is the nearest, we assume that our test data point is a yellow dot as well. Okay, then I will, from the last classifier from my part is decision tree. The decision tree is one of the models used for classification. In a tree structure, a series of test questions and conditions were organized by decision tree classifier. The root and internal nodes in the decision tree provide test conditions for attribute to distinguish records which have different characteristics. A class label yes or no is allocated to every terminal node. Decision tree usually consists of nodes, edge, or branch, and also leaf nodes. So we can see the picture below here. The refund will act as a node, and the yes or no, the arrow yes or no will add. And also the last one is the terminal nodes. Merge status. So I will proceed to the next presenter.
Okay, thank you, Shakirin. I'll proceed with the next classifier, which is neural network. As the name suggests, neural network is modeled on the way the brain works, specifically the way it represents information. What makes neural network different from other machine learning algorithms is that they make use of an architecture inspired from the neurons in the brain. They use artificial intelligence to untangle and break down extremely complex relationships. Neural networks can be created from at least 3 layers of neurons. They are input layer, hidden layer, and output layer. The hidden layer consists of many neurons with connections between the layers. As the neural network processes the data, the way of the connection between the neurons are fine-tuned and then allow the network to come up with accurate predictions. For example, in this picture, the network has 3 inputs, a hidden layer with 5 neurons, and an output layer with 2 neurons. All these are what makes them a network. Okay, this is the last classifier, support vector machine or SVM. It is a supervised learning models with associated learning algorithms. that analyze data used for classification and regression analysis. However, it is mostly used in classification problems. In SVM algorithm, we plot each data item as a point in n-dimensional space, where n is the number of features that we have, with the value of each feature being the value of a particular coordinate. Then, we perform classification by finding the hyperplane that differentiates the two classes. Okay, the main objective in SVM is to find optimal hyperplane to correctly classify between the data points. So it needs to identify the one that achieves maximum margin between the classes. Margin is defined as the distance between a planar decision surface that separates two classes and the closest training samples to the decision surface, meaning that we have to maximize the distance between nearest data point and hyperplane to decide the right hyperplane. Another reason for selecting the hyperplane with higher margin is robustness. If we select a hyperplane having low margin, then there is high chance of misclassification. So, the bigger the distance, the more confident we can be that the SVM is making the right decision. For example, from the figure above, at the left side, there are many hyperplanes. We need to choose which hyperplanes that segregates the two classes better. So at the right side, it shows the optimal hyperplane as it has high margin. And then see that the two squares and one circle, they are the closest to the hyperplane. These are what we call support vectors. Support vectors, they help to determine the orientation and position of the hyperplane in order to maximize the classifier margin. Next. Okay, here is another example. The green hyperplane H1 does not separate the classes, while the blue hyperplane H2, it does separate the classes, but with a small margin. And last, the best hyperplane is H3, the red one, because it separates them with maximal margin. Also, bear in mind that the larger the margin, the lower the generalization rate error of the classifier. Linear SVM can be readily extended to non-linear SVM. So, if the data we are working with is not linearly separable, it is possible to apply a technique known kernel transformation. It takes low dimensional input space and transforms it to a higher dimensional space. Simply put, the kernel transformation does some extremely complex data transformations, then finds out the process to separate the data. So it is very useful in non-linear separation problem. Okay, next. Okay. Again, this kernel transformation method, it is able to map our non-linear separable data into a higher dimensional space, making our data linearly separable. By using this new dimensional space, SVM can then be easily implemented. Okay. In machine learning classification problems, there are often too many variables or features. The higher the number of features, the harder it gets to visualize and work on the dataset. Sometimes most of these features are correlated and redundant. So this is where dimensionality reduction algorithms come into play. Dimensionality reduction is simply the process of reducing the dimension of the feature set. It transforms data from a high dimensional space into a low dimensional space so that the low dimensional representation retains some meaningful properties of the original data, ideally close to its intrinsic dimension. So why should we care about this? We care because of the Kerr's dimensionality, which refers to all the problems that arise when working with data in the higher dimensions. As the number of features increase, the model becomes more complex. The more the number of features, the more the chance of overfitting. Overfit will result to poor data performance. So, avoiding overfitting is a major motivation for performing dimensionality reduction. Okay, there are two components of dimensionality reduction. First, feature extraction. It reduces the data in a high dimensional space to a lower dimension space by combining the existing one. The second one is feature selection. It identifies a relevant subset of the original features. It usually involves three ways: a filter, wrapper, and embedded strategy. That's all from me. I'll pass to the next presenter.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So now I'll be talking about unsupervised learning. So in this case, we are going to look into cluster analysis. Cluster analysis is a popular technique with data that has high dimensionality, in which case, example is gene microarray. So what it does is that it divides objects into groups by measuring similarities. So it measures similarities by using 1 minus correlation and also Euclidean distance. So now let's look into the types of clustering algorithms discussed. So we have the hierarchical clustering, K-means clustering, partitioning around MEDOIDS, and also self-organizing feature maps. So the first type of clustering we are going to talk about is the hierarchical clustering. So the hierarchical clustering, it groups data into a tree-like structure. So it uses two approaches called as bottom-up and also top-down approach. So the bottom-up approach, are also known as the agglomerative approach, consists of each data point is considered a cluster and then it is grouped based on the similarity. Meanwhile, in the top-down or divisive approach, all the data points are assigned to a cluster and then divided into small clusters until there is only a cluster for each point. So based on the picture shown here, we can see that the agglomerative is the bottom-up approach and the divisive is the top-down approach. So our next form of clustering is the K-means clustering. So the K-means clustering partitions data into K distinct clusters. In this case, K is an unknown number based on the distance to the centroid of a cluster. A centroid is a data point at the center of a cluster. It contains one number for each variable, and each number is the mean of a variable for the observation in that cluster. So how does it work? Firstly, it starts with a predefined number of clusters, and then the data points are assigned according to the distance from centers. And then the position of these points are recalculated based on their current distance. And the points to K are then reassigned again. And this is repeated until the stability of the data points are achieved. So based on the figure here, we can see that the X represents the data points and the red circle represents the centroids. So next, we are going to talk about partitioning around MEDOIDS. So what are MEDOIDS? MEDOIDS are defined as point in cluster whose dissimilarities with all other points is minimum. So it starts with computing a dissimilarity matrix, and then it maps resulting distance matrix into clusters represented by MEDOIDS. In this type of algorithm, we have a term called silhouette. So the silhouette is the measure of cluster distinction. A silhouette measure of 1 shows that the observations are well clustered, while a negative measure of silhouette shows that the observations are clustered into the wrong cluster. So the goal of partitioning around MEDOIDS is to minimize average dissimilarity of objects to their closest selected object. So in this picture, you can see that the red dots and the blue dots are the clusters, and the light blue circle here are the MEDOIDS. Next, we're going to talk about self-organizing feature maps. So self-organizing feature maps is basically an algorithm that is a grid of neurons. So it is a neuronal network. What it does is that it finds clusters and it allows visualization of p-dimensional data. The neurons can be of rectangular or hexagonal arrangement. The neurons then learns to become prototypes for training data points. After that, similar objects are mapped to the same or neighboring neurons, and non-similar neurons are mapped apart. This is to preserve intrinsic relationship. So in the picture here shows an example of how the neuronal network, the self-organizing feature map, is conducted. Bi-clustering approach. So bi-clustering approach is a preferred approach in the biological field, as it can simultaneously cluster rows and columns of data matrix and discover local patterns. So now we're going to move into tuning parameters in clustering. So once clustering is done, researchers have to think about distance matrix and also type of linkage. So distance defines the desired notion of similarity between 2 points. So an example is 1 minus correlation distance, and this is the equation. Another one is Mahalanobis distance, in which the data can vary more in some direction, and this is the equation used. The linkage defines the desired notion of similarity between two groups of measurement.
Okay, now I will continue with the practicalities using R. So as we know, R is only a letter, right? But it has a meaning behind the letter. So R is a programming language and free open source system for statistical computing and graphics, which it also implemented with machine learning. So current task view is a list of package that is grouped by topic that provide range of machine learning model. So the function of current task view is providing a guidance for package of certain topics. Then, as we can see here, ML interfaces is an example of a software package by the Bioconductor project that provide tools. Bioconductor project is an open source software that uses a R language with other programming language that aims to give tools for the analysis and comprehension of high throughput genomic data. This is ML interfaces is an example of the Bioconductor project. So ML interfaces uses an unsupervised method and supervised method for data analysis. Okay, now we go to the unsupervised method. Okay, unsupervised method is a simple approach in unsupervised learning with the goal of finding structure in unlabeled data. So the example of supervised method is PAM algorithm, which is partitioning around MEDOIDS. Okay, it will give a graphical output by using the R command. As we can see in the left picture, we can see it is a cluster displayed in a two-dimensional principal components projection. Okay, a 2D principal components shows the ellipse plotted in the PC spline that are clustered specific minimum volume ellipsoids of the data project. Okay, this data actually can also be visualized in three principal components that give more variability. Okay, next we see the right picture. Okay, this is display a silhouette cluster, which is each of the observation that measures the cluster distinction. For the silhouette, it is we can see the number, the average number of the cluster, right? So the large average indicates well clustered, while the negative values indicate the wrong cluster that was assigned in an observation. Okay, the next slide, we will talk about the supervised method. Okay, the supervised method is aimed to discover the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable that represent as a model. Okay, as our group already talked about this, there are examples of supervised method, which is trees, neural networks, and SVMs. Okay, in this example, I only talk about the neural network model and confusion matrix. Okay, neural network model that shows how they transform two or more inputs into an output. Then for the confusion matrix, we can see the example of confusion matrix in the first picture. Okay, so the confusion matrix is function to assess the classification accuracy of the data set. Okay, this is the example of confusion matrix in the left picture, and the right picture, it shows a tree structure for the data. Okay, all the data, we can find a qualitative aspects that can be cleared if we construct a further approaches by using the decision regions. Okay, next, I should continue.
Okay, so next we are going to look into the variable importance display. So the relative contribution of features in successful classifications events can be measured. It involves repetition through random samples of variables and cases, and it demonstrates that variable becomes more important if the accuracy decreases when the variable is randomly removed. So two approaches that is discussed here is the random forest approach and the boosting method. So for the random forest approach, it has a huge number of individual decision trees that works as a unit. So the principle is that it removes a class prediction, and in the end, the class that has the highest votes becomes the model's prediction. Next would be the boosting method. So boosting method is a grouping method that produces a strong classifier from a number of weak classifiers. So firstly, a model from the training data is created. Secondly, the second model is created in which it attempts to correct errors from the first model. I'll pass to the next presenter, please.
Okay, for the summary, the R system consists a large number of easily installed machine learning methods and well-documented packages. It is due to the computer memory shortage, the implementations of unsupervised techniques cannot work with tens of thousands of features. Okay, next.
So to conclude, the development of current technology provides numerous of advantages for the modern biology, especially from machine learning. The safety measures must be taken into when handling some of the advanced machine learning. Studies have shown that the quality of these results may differ from each user to others, as it depends on the experience and professionalism of the specific user. It is advised by other studies to cross-validate the procedures in supervised learning to attain neutral accurate results. And that's all from us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.